Good evening. My name is Ana Margarita Irizarry, and I'm with Lucha. You're watching Housing Issues, a live, active, interactive show on CanTV 21. We're also streaming online at cantv.org/hotline. For the next 25 minutes, we have a chance to discuss landlord-tenant rights and issues. The call number is at the bottom of your screen. You can call 312-738-1060. Now, today we're going to talk specifically about the Residential Landlord Tenant Ordinance. I want to make it very clear that there are some exclusions, and also that this is not legal advice. I am not your attorney. We're just talking in general terms about the ordinance. So the Residential Landlord Tenant Ordinance has in the city of Chicago some exclusions. There are more than the ones I'm going to mention, but here are a few. It does not apply to units that are owner occupied and have 6 units or less. And it doesn't apply to hotels, motels, bed and breakfasts where the tenant has lived there for less than 32 days. Okay? Now that we've made that clear, let's get started. Now let's talk about what are some of the responsibilities that your landlord has. Your landlord has to disclose a few things when you're signing the lease. One of them is their name, their address, and a phone number. It has to be either their number or the phone number and the contact information of an agent. One little piece of knowledge I like to share is that if a landlord doesn't share that information with you, that's a big red flag in my opinion. Why? Because if there's any future issues with your landlord, it'll be hard for you, or almost impossible at times, to send a certified letter to your landlord. And under the ordinance, that is the most appropriate way of communicating with them if there's any major issues. Why? Because you want to have that information available to you when you go to court. Okay, so what other disclosure should your landlord give you? For example, if there's any municipal code violations in the last 12 months, or if their water, electricity, or gas are going to be shut off, whether it's because the city is making repairs or because they're making repairs on the property. Your landlord needs to give you proper notice, okay? Your landlord also has certain responsibilities. Landlords have the responsibility to maintain the property, okay? They have an obligation to keep it safe, to keep it clean, to keep it warm. You have a right to warm water or hot water, heat that works, and cold water as well. The tenant obviously has similar responsibilities. The tenant has the responsibility of maintaining the property, of not disturbing their neighbors and letting them enjoy peaceful enjoyment of the property, throwing away the trash, and just general cleanliness, and it goes without saying, paying your rent on time. Now, let's talk really quickly about the security deposit. If when you lease up an apartment, your landlord requests a security deposit, they can do so. But they need to give you information about where it's held, and it needs to be held in a federally secured bank. And upon 14 days, or within 14 days of making the security deposit payment, the tenant has to be given the name of the bank and the address of the bank. Okay? And after 12 months, the landlord has to give the tenant interest on that money. Most of the time, the interest accumulated is not very high, but it doesn't matter. The landlord has an obligation to give the tenant that money. And under the ordinance, it can be very costly for a landlord not to do so. Now, and after the tenant vacates, the landlord has 45 days to return the security deposit to the tenant. But they only have 30 days upon the tenant leaving to send them a list of the deductions and damages done to the property. Okay? And normal wear and tear cannot be deducted. Okay? So, for example, normal, like having to repaint the walls. Unless it's something excessive, for example, the courts haven't been very clear as to what normal wear and tear is, but painting, for example, tends to be considered normal wear and tear. And again, if the landlord doesn't return the money and makes no contact with you within those 45 days, you have a right to your security deposit and to begin court proceedings. I advise for you to contact an attorney or a legal aid attorney to do that. Now, and you also have to give the landlord your contact information. So if you're leaving and you want your security deposit back, you have to give them a contact information so that they can send you the letter and forward you the information necessary, or return you or send you a check. Right of entry. Does your landlord have a right to enter the property? Yes. But they need to give you proper notice. They need to give you 48 hours. And the landlord has the right to access the property to make necessary repairs for the property, to show the property to potential buyers, right? If you have a lease and you're not renewing that lease, 60 days prior to your lease expiring, the landlord can start showing the property to potential renters. One exception is if there's an emergency, your landlord doesn't need to give you notice. For example, your downstairs neighbors or your upstairs neighbor is reporting a gas leak. That could potentially be very dangerous. If a call is made to the fire department, the landlord technically doesn't have to give you notice because it's an emergency and it could put the lives of yourself and your neighbors in jeopardy. Okay? But other than that, your landlord has to give you 48-hour notice. Okay? And the usual hours for a landlord to come into a unit is between 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. If it doesn't happen within those times, it really needs to be agreed upon between the parties. Okay? So what are the expected housing conditions? I already mentioned some of them. Obviously, the apartment needs to heat up properly, and as to code and standard in the city of Chicago, you need to have hot running water and cool water as well. Your building needs to be structurally safe. You need to have accessible exits. And depending on the age of the building, sprinklers, fire alarm systems, most definitely, no matter the age of the system, your building needs to have smoke detectors. All units need to have smoke detectors in the city of Chicago. So what are other conditions? You can, as a tenant, expect for the hallway and the stairway to have light. It needs to be properly lit so that it can be safe. The windows need to be in working condition. And there shouldn't be an accumulation of stagnant water. And if there's any rodents or pests in the property, they should be dealt with and exterminated accordingly. So a lot of the times people ask me, so what are my options? Can I just stop paying rent altogether? As a general rule, the landlord is no. Now, if you remember at the beginning of the show, I said something like, get your landlord's information, right? And the reason why I said that is because if for whatever reason you're facing issues with your property and your landlord is not addressing them, then you need to send them a certified letter. And the only way you can do that is if you have their contact information, which is why I'm saying it's so important to do that at the beginning. A good landlord will share the information, either their personal information or their agent's information, so that you can make the appropriate complaints and requests, okay? So if you have any given issue in your property, you can send them a certified letter expressing your concerns and your issues, and you can say, please address them, and you get your receipt, right? If the landlord doesn't, and you let them know that if the issues don't get addressed, you will deduct them from your rent, okay? Now, this gets really specific, and as a general rule, I recommend contacting an attorney before you send that 14-day notice. But in theory, you send the letter, it gets received, and your landlord has up to 14 days to make the repairs. If the landlord doesn't make the repairs upon receiving the 14-day notice from you, then you can hire a professional and deduct the repairs from your rent. But the repairs cannot be more than $500 or half of your monthly rent. So really, in my opinion, because we're talking about a lot of money, contact an attorney to make sure that the minor defects are getting addressed. But like I said, sometimes enough minor defects can make people really upset, and that's understandable. But not paying your rent can put you and your loved ones in jeopardy. Eviction stays on your record for 7.5 years, so you want to make sure that you are protecting your housing, okay? So what are your, do you always have to pay, wait 14 days? No. Of course, if there is a heating issue, for example, your landlord has to repair or make the appropriate repairs much quicker than that. That's considered material non-compliance, okay? And in the case of material non-compliance, they have only 72 hours to make the repairs. And material non-compliance includes heat, rotting water, hot water, electricity, gas, or plumbing. Okay, so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about material non-compliance. And a tenant can terminate the rental agreement by written notice to the landlord if material non-compliance or failure to persist for more than 72 hours. Okay, so people tend to think, oh, everything is swayed to the landlord, but no, tenants do have a way of breaking a lease legally if there's material non-compliance, but I hope anyone out there watching today is not suffering through that right now. So, what are some of the things that your landlord, so assuming you maintain your property, you pay your rent on time, and you maintain a clean property, there should be, in theory, no issues with your landlord. But if you don't pay your rent, if you violate the terms of your lease, or even if you have a month-to-month lease or your landlord is selling, I want you to hear really closely. Now, if you for whatever reason, personal or otherwise, don't pay your rent in any given month, your landlord will give you 5 days to pay your rent. Now, I want to make something really clear. In the state of Illinois, everyone has 5 days to pay their rent, flat out, and you cannot be charged a late fee for that. Let's say your rent is due on the 1st of the month, then you have until the 5th. Okay? So that's, if a landlord is trying to charge you a late payment fee, because you always pay on the 3rd, no. That's, in Illinois, you have up to 5 days. But after the 5 days, they can give you what's called a 5 days notice, which is a notice terminating your lease because you haven't paid your rent. And you only have 5 days to cure the issue. So what does that mean? It means that you have 5 days to pay your rent. So you got an additional 5 days to pay your rent. Otherwise, your lease is terminated. And that means your landlord can file a complaint and can take you to eviction court. Okay? Now, most certainly, eviction does not happen that quickly. A lot of times people come to me and ask me, well, if I miss my payment, when is the sheriff coming? And the eviction process is a lot more complicated than that. But yes, that would be the eventual consequence of not paying your rent. And I want to make it clear, not paying your rent will affect your credit for 7.5 years. So like I said, your landlord can file a complaint with the courts after they've given you 5 days notice and the 5 days have passed. Okay, so you have 5 days to pay your rent. Then they can give you, after those 5 days, they can give you a 5-day notice. And if within those 5 days you don't pay your rent, then they can go ahead and file a complaint. Okay? Now, let's say you're violating the terms of your lease. For example, some buildings don't allow pets of any kind, with the exclusion, of course, of service animals. No one can discriminate against you for having a service animal. But other than that, a landlord can choose to not have pets. So if for whatever reason, personal or otherwise, you end up taking a pet into your unit, your landlord has a right to give you a 10-day notice. Now, the 10-day notice can go in two ways. It can, one, give you 10 days to cure the issue, to say you have 10 days to get the dog out of the unit, otherwise your lease will be terminated. Or your landlord can say, you violated the terms of your lease, you have 10 days to vacate. Please keep in mind that it doesn't matter even that you paid your rent. I've had people ask me before, well, what do I do if I've already paid my rent? Will I get the balance prorated? No, you violated the terms of your lease. It's a general rule. Now, but what's my advice to you out there watching today? Talk to an attorney, because every situation is different, and the law is always changing. So this is today me giving general knowledge on the ordinance, and tomorrow a court ruling might change. So you have to keep in mind that information can become quickly outdated. And I'm saying that as a caveat, so to remind you to please always go talk to an attorney, whether it's us at Lucha or any of the many amazing legal aid organizations that we have here in the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois. Okay. Your landlord can also give you a 14-day notice, which is failure to maintain, and it will allow the landlord to enter the unit. Now, there's other things your landlord can do. They can determine if you don't have a lease or if your lease expired, they can give you what's called a 30-day notice, which means that if you pay your rent on the first of the month, when they collect the check, they can give you on that same day a 30-day notice to leave, and you have to leave within the next 30 days. Now, if they give you a 30-day notice in the middle of the month, let's say they give you the 30-day notice on January 15th, you have until the end of February. Why? Because your notice cannot kind of caught halfway through another rent payment. Okay, so you get to live out the half of January and the end of February, up to the end of February, but that's it. Okay, so if your landlord is giving you a 30-day notice on the 15th of the month and they're expecting you to be out in 2 weeks, that's wrong. Okay, they can't even give it to you on the 5th if they expect you to be out by the 30th. They need to give you full 30 days or more. Okay, and if you have improper notice, it can be doubled and it can turn into 60 days. Okay. Now, one of the questions I usually get is, I didn't pay my rent. Can the landlord lock me out? The answer to that is no. It's categorical. There's no way around it. Your landlord cannot, under any circumstances, lock you out. Whether you have a month-to-month lease or you have a year-long lease, for whatever the reason, whether it's personal or non-payment, your landlord cannot lock you out. They have to go through the eviction proceedings. So what does this mean? If you get locked out, you call the police. That's your best recourse, so that they can help open the door for you. It could potentially lead to legal proceedings, getting an attorney, but the first step is always calling the police. Now, One other things I'd like to always mention is no rental agreement can include the waiver of your tenant rights. So like I've mentioned already a few times before today, always talk to an attorney, right? And the law is always changing, whether it's a local ordinance, state law, or federal law, it's always changing. But you can never waive your rights as a tenant, okay? Your late fee. Now, this is important and requires a little bit of math. So one thing I like to say is you only can get charged a late fee once per month, right? So let's say you have 5 days to pay your rent and you pay on the day on the 6th. Your landlord has a right to charge you a late fee because you paid on the 6th of the month, okay? So, but how do we know if you're being calculated a rate that is fair? So the tenant shall pay $10 per month for the first $500 and 5% for anything over $500. So you're going to have to take out your calculators and figure out your rent yourself. But it basically means that for let's say your rent is $1,000 a month. For the first $500, your landlord can only charge you $10. And then for the additional $500, they can only charge you 5% of that money. Okay? Another thing that's important, or another item I like to remind tenants, is not only can you not waive your rights, but your landlord cannot retaliate against you. So what does this mean? You have a right to call 311. If there is something wrong in your building and you contact your landlord and your landlord does not address the issue, you should always call 311. A landlord cannot retaliate against you, and you can take them to court. Okay? Now, people tend to feel, as a general rule, a little bit more comfortable to do this when they are in a year-long lease, because it's easier for potentially things to get complicated down the line and a landlord to potentially wait or make a person more vulnerable to retaliation. So that's something to keep in mind. But the landlord should never do that. And you should know that you have a right to file the complaint. And if you feel like you've been that your landlord is retaliating, you should again contact your attorney. And like I said at the beginning of the show and mentioned several times over in this presentation, in the city of Chicago, there are many great organizations that do the services for free. Amongst them is us, Lucha, Latin United Community Housing Association. We have our law project, but there are other many non-for-profits in the city of Chicago that provide the service for free. So some things to keep in mind when you have a landlord-tenant relationship. We always, if you have a lease, make sure to renew it. Okay, it gives you the most protection. We want to thank everyone again for your time. Thank you for watching today. Again, my name is Ana Margarita Rizarri, and I am with Lucha. If you need any more information, you can reach us at Lucha. We are located at 3541 West North Avenue. Our phone number is 773-276-5338, extension 235. Again, it's 773-276-5338, extension 235. Thank you so much, and I hope everyone here has a great night. Thank you.